Hello.
Hey, good
How's
morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Let me turn on my video.
I think I didn't receive a panelist invite for this presentation. I received it for yesterday's presentation, but then it got changed. But
Yeah, I did send you this one last week.
this one?
Yeah, and you weren't able to find it, and then you did find it in your junk mail folder.
Okay,
So
one moment.
it looks like we have one participant right now, Jess Myers. And apparently people are able to join even though I asked for a waiting room, so that's okay. But yeah, you are. Oh, actually says for you to be promoted to a panelist. So I'll promote you. If I had sent you an email, I don't know why that was the case, but it's all different.
Did you see the chat, Mia?
Like next meeting to 11. Oh no.
There we go. Can you see me now?
I can. I love that background.
Do you notice that? This is I got some old swag from the
There you
secret.
go.
I know I didn't luck out. For like our new round of supplies, they didn't have the shirt access to the shirt that I was, or the attire that I was hoping to.
Oh, okay. It's interesting. I can't see me anymore.
You go to view, and then I like to do side by side gallery. It's in the like where your screen is at the very top. You'll see a little camera or little rectangle boxes, and it says view right next to it.
I'm not seeing that.
Can you see?
I have my presentation on two screens.
Okay.
Um,
On the screen where you see developing a competitive application, the PowerPoint slide,
mhm.
on the background, in the background there should be a little button at the top right corner that says view, and it looks like a little rectangle box with three boxes next to it. If you share your screen with me, I probably should be able to show you.
Oh, that's okay. I don't, as a couple of things aren't working as they had on prior webinars, I think I'm just going to leave it as is right now.
Okay.
But thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't need to see myself.
Do you see me?
I do.
Yeah, it's stuck on that option to where you see someone else beside yourself. But
Okay.
you can
Yes, there's just I didn't have a view, but I have the speaker view, and now I'm just saying both of us.
perfect.
So Jess hopped off, and Marie, Colleen, MC Hannon,
How do you know someone jumped off?
because they're no longer in my participant list. MC, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Now, aren't you a successful Texas Sea Grant awardee?
I am.
Were you a scholar, or are you? Tell me your current designation.
I am a PhD candidate, and I'm in my writing phase of the whole process. So,
With the grants and aid?
pardon?
With the grants and aid, Texas Sea Grant grants and
Oh,
aid?
yes. It was the graduate fellowship grant and aid, I believe.
Were you also an undergraduate scholar or just the grants and aid?
I was not. I think out in California. I went to my undergrad in California.
Okay.
And I think I worked with a different program. I don't think it was Sea Grant out there.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I'm going to put you on mute for now.
Okay.
We may have done such a good job in our materials on our webpage. I think that's, I don't know, it seems like as we keep improving our webpage, we have, and despite our media announcements for the webinar, we seem to have less people joining.
Yeah, that can be taken two ways, right?
Yeah.
Yes. I feel that these set of instructions, at least going through them and making sure they're all there, I think they're very straightforward. I think the word count is super helpful to the applicants.
Yeah.
I think that really helps you understand what you should be speaking about and how much of it you should be speaking about with that word count. So it's nice to see that they're trying to help everyone out and have a fair chance here.
Yeah. Well, even though it's 11, I'm going to wait a little bit longer so we can see if we have some others that'll join in on.
We have MC, we have Savannah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Jess will be back in a moment. And I know for sure that I believe it's Ashley's not going to be able to make it.
Jordana's just joined.
But I let her know that there will be a recording once we finish.
Yes.
Also, Mia.
Yes, sir.
Your chat is directed toward me only. The other students can't see it. So whenever you chat, there's a little drop-down box.
Mm-hmm.
And you can click either host and panelists or everyone. And the last message you sent, I noticed, was just
I see. Yes. Okay.
just in case you were to share a link or something in the middle of the presentation or.
Thank you.
So.
So we are waiting on participants to join.
We got a couple more here.
Yeah. It's nice to see familiar names.
Yes,
We've already communicated with and assisted. Good morning, all. We are waiting for more attendees to join in, so I'm going to give it a couple more minutes or so and see if we can allow others to join in before we start. So thank you for your patience. Well, good morning, all. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We have, I have a panelist here. Holly Hunter is our research program assistant. Those who have already gotten some assistance from Hunter, he's been a great asset to our research administration team. So welcome this morning. You are at the webinar that we host typically every year in January for developing a competitive application for the John A. Knauss Fellowship. And so we're recording the meeting, the webinar, and we will make it publicly available, the recording as well as this presentation, PDF of our presentation materials. If you can, save your questions for after the presentation. There'll be plenty of time. And as we're all getting and have gotten familiar with Zoom, you can just click on the chat tab and proceed by typing your question. So again, this webinar is to assist you in developing a competitive application for the John A. Knauss Marine Policy Fellowship. My name is Mia Zwolinski. I am Assistant Director at Texas Sea Grant for Research and Fiscal Administration. We also, as I mentioned just a moment ago, have our research program assistant, Hunter Holly, and in our audience is our Director of Texas Sea Grant, Dr. Pamela Plotkin. So before we go into the webinar and the pages in depth, as a most important advice type slide for you to concentrate on is these items here. Read the funding opportunity announcement, and you have seen this. So this is the federal funding guidelines, requirements, all of the specifics for this specific opportunity. Read and study the student guide, section tables and evaluation criteria, which is this document. They have the fellowship program office at the National Program Office at the National Sea Grant Program Fellowship Program Office has put together this wonderful student guide that we will step you through on our presentation. So, again, read the funding, federal funding opportunity announcement, read and study and review the different section tables that are in this guide. and the evaluation criteria that they have for each of the elements that are required in your application. As most of you know, we have all of the information detailed and available for review on our webpage. So we want you to basically follow the instructions in the guidelines, both the student guide and the federal funding guidelines, and ask questions prior to submission. We've had a lot of good communications already with interested applicants, and if there's something you do not understand, email Hunter and myself. We're here to assist in providing you guidance and for you to follow the student guide, review criteria tables and what's required in your application. But after your application is submitted, the state Sea Grant programs are required to not make any changes. So it's a requirement that the state Sea Grant program submits the application as is, as you have submitted to us, unchanged from the original file that you submit to us. So how do you submit an application? We will have the students submit applications directly to our Sea Grant program office and not in the grants.gov application. Submit the required application elements to Hunter Hawley and submit those before 5 o'clock, before February 18th, or by February 18th at 5 o'clock, no exceptions. All 6 elements of the application must be completed by the student and submitted in one combined, compiled PDF document in the exact order as noted in the federal funding opportunity guidelines and also described on our next slide pages. Texas Sea Grant, though, we will complete the additional sub-elements of the director's letter for recommendation, the state Sea Grant director's letter of recommendation, the budget narrative, and the 90-4 budget form and that budget justification. Those 2 pieces are a part of the component called a budget narrative, and we will create and compile that information for you. So you do not have to, that is not a required element that you need to submit to us. Once the application comes into us, then the Texas A&M Sponsored Research Services offices, they will complete the grants.gov application and submit on your behalf by the deadline on April 1. So you just email your compiled PDF to Hunter, and then it will go over to our sponsored programs office, who will submit by April 1. So what we're going to review right now are the required elements of the application that you will be submitting to us. So we're going to be covering an overview and then detailed content. So as an overview, there are 6 required elements that will be required to be compiled into that one PDF file that you'll be submitting to us. The first one is your personal and academic curricula vitae, your CV, 2 pages maximum. The next element is your personal education and career development response, 1,500 words maximum. The third item is your relevant coursework and future plans. That's a 1-page maximum. The fourth element are 2 letters of recommendation, and both have a maximum page limit of 2 pages. Your transcripts, we ask you to have a clear scanned copy of all of your undergraduate and your graduate school transcripts. Unofficial transcripts are perfectly acceptable. And then the 6th element is a written statement from the National Sea Grant Fellowship Program Manager, if it's necessary, for those applicants who may be attending a university outside of Texas at a university in a state that does not have a Sea Grant program, they may choose to submit through a state that does have a Sea Grant program, but that applicant would have to obtain a written statement of approval to apply through that state's Sea Grant program. So if that is applicable to you, then that would be the sixth element that you would include in your PDF application file. So I have a note here to definitely refer you to the student guide and the section tables with the content tips that they have provided, that the Fellowship Program Office has provided, and the review criteria and the scoring points for each of those review criteria. And the review criteria, all of this information that we have here, and the review criteria that the Fellowship Program Office has compiled into that student guide, those review criteria are as per the federal funding opportunity guidelines review criteria pages. So we are providing all of this information for you and trying to point you in the direction as to where you need to pay particular attention to what is the best way to include information in each of these 5 areas. And so again, the student guide, what they've done here, I think is just tremendous. This is the first time that they've really pulled together a lot of the hints and requirements going from to the application materials. These tables are going to tell you, so exactly here are these same elements that I have here. And then they're breaking out each of these sections. So we will go over each of these sections as well. But I want to emphasize, look at these tables. And as we go over them, again, go back to these tables. We've tried to display the same sort of information. They give you pro tips on what to do for each of these elements. They give you a specific point scale that based on the review criteria, then this is how the federal funding guidelines, the reviewers will be reviewing each of these elements. So for example, the CV, if it outlines, if your CV provides all of the outlined expectations that are under the review criteria, it could be scored anywhere from 7 to 10 points. And then if it only addresses some of the expectations, then the point that you would achieve by the reviewers would be in the mid-range, and et cetera. So each of these tables, and we will review this on our pages as well, they will tell you exactly how much of the rating is for each of these sections. So for example, the CV is rated 10% of 100% score, so 10 points here. So I just wanted to relate that back to you. So I will be going over each of these 5 elements. The first element, as I mentioned, is the CV, 2 pages maximum. Please do not include any personal contact information or web links to external resources. Any personal contact information, we ask for you to not include it. If for whatever reason it's still included on your document, we will redact that from your application that you submit to us. But just please don't include any of the personal information or web links. It's a best practice. The second required element is your personal education and career development response. This will emphasize your abilities and expectations from the fellowship. What as an applicant, what you would be providing to the fellowship program as your abilities, and then what you as an applicant are desiring to expect from this fellowship, from the Knauss Fellowship as compared to other fellowships, and how that is packaged together as an experience level, your abilities and expectations from the fellowship experience in a way of career development. 1,500 words. There are 3 different sections that we'll go over. Each section and subsection described below should be answered separately. And do note that the section headers of that 1,500 word count, the section headers are included in that word count. So again, this information is taken exactly from the guidelines and from this wonderful student guideline in each of the tables. So the personal education and career development response is much broader than how they've wanted the students to provide information previously. And they've broken it out where there are 3 sections that they want you to develop in a way of communicating your personal education and your career development response. So the first section is an icebreaker, 25 words. Describe yourself in 1 sentence, 20 words. They give you that guide. And then secondly, list 5 adjectives that someone would attribute to your character. So that would be 5 words. Get a fellow student, a friend, whomever, run that through some of your friends or student colleagues to, look at what you've described yourselves in 20 words and what 5 adjectives would attribute to your character. So that's the icebreaker to your personal education career development response. And then secondly, the second section of the personal education and career development response is your career path and objectives. The third section is your career path experience. So each of these 2 sections related to your career path are 700 words each that they want you to address and limit to that count. And then the slide has the details on there. So just note that related to your career path for career development, section 2 covers your objectives, section 3 covers your experience. And I'm going to jump back to the student guide table just to give you an idea of how detailed and helpful it is. So, and this is what we'll be covering. So they want you to cover each specific section. They've given you the suggested word count, given you again some pro tips, the points, the review criteria. So again, this table is what we're reviewing here as well for you. So on continuing on with that personal education and career development response, that section 2, after the icebreaker, section 2 goes into your career path and objectives. They want you to answer 3 questions, 700 words total. The first of 3 questions would be for you to discuss your experience, whether it has to do with research or other experience, but discuss your experiences that support or relate to the mission of the National Sea Grant Program or the State Sea Grant Program. Now, you don't have to have a direct connection to Sea Grant, but they would like for you to discuss that if you do have an experience related to either the national program or a state program. And that you should emphasize, if relevant, any experience with extending or distilling science for non-scientific audiences. So that section of experience would be 250 words max is their suggestion. And again, you're wanting to write your text, limit jargon, highly scientific jargon, limit acronyms, define areas such that a non-scientist like myself would be able to read and understand your experience. So the second question of the career path objectives is for the student to discuss their interest in the fellowship program. Specifically, how you are interested in the Knauss Fellowship program as opposed to other fellowships that might be available. How you feel that the Knauss Fellowship would focus on your career pathway, and how it would further support your development as a professional. So again, that's 250 words. And then the third question they want you to specifically answer is to discuss your transferable skills, skills that can be applied across a variety of disciplines, what you would bring to the fellowship. And in this response, they also would like for you to highlight experiences from all areas of your experience, you know, from a personal perspective, from a professional and academic perspective, that background. They want you to communicate in 200 words your transferable skills that can relate and bring highlighting those experiences in those areas. So continuing with the personal education and career development response, that last and third section of this response is the career path experience. So the prior slide was, all of this was talking about your objectives related to your career path. This goes into your experience. So there are two questions here they want you to answer, 700 words total. So firstly, Sea Grant, the National Sea Grant Program values the principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility. And what the reviewers would like to see is for you to discuss how your experience has been where you may have collaborated or engaged with diverse community members and or interested partners, and or how you would be or could be an ambassador for these principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, these principles that are throughout the Knauss program. And number two, the reviewers, part of the review criteria is that they would like for you to discuss a situation in which you may have overcome a challenge. Example, within a community or an institution, personally or professionally, but how it specifically would relate to how you took a leadership role in that situation and in overcoming that specific challenge. Also consider including a reflection on what you may have learned from that experience. So that would be a maximum of 400 words. So there's the review criteria for the section 3 career path experience. Under the required elements, I'm going to go back to the 5 items that typically all of the applicants will be compiling into their PDF application. We've gone over the CV, we've gone over the 3 sections of the personal education and career development response, 1,500 words max of all those breakdowns that we just went over. Now we're looking at the third component, the third element, relevant coursework and future year plans. So jumping back ahead to there, is under the relevant coursework and future year plans, the guidelines are and review criteria are wanting you to list your relevant coursework and your future year activities. So your relevant coursework, you would want to discuss any completed or in progress classes that you may deem relevant to what you feel would be bringing in a successful opportunity and experience level to Knauss Fellowship program. List your future year activities, list a listing of your classes and or your plans for the spring, summer, and fall of this year. This is the relevant coursework and future year plans has a one-page limit. We want you to use the white space, use this to give the reviewer, the reader, an understanding of this coursework that you're involved with and will be involved with in your future plans, how this all will relate and be relevant to the success as a Knauss Fellow, and how those different year activities, classes, or plans are going to make you a competitive applicant and one that the fellowship program would love to hear about. So sell yourself on this. Don't just make a list. And then the fourth, going to the fourth, fifth, and sixth element for your application. The fourth are your letters of recommendation. The two letters from individuals who have worked with the student, including at least one from a faculty member with knowledge of the student's academic and research, if when applicable, the performance. And each of those letters must not exceed 2 pages each, and they want those 2-page maximum limit on those letters to be single-spaced. And again, this is all detailed in the tables in that student guide. We'll go into each of these even further. So the transcripts, of course, your undergraduate and graduate, unofficial or acceptable, just make sure they're clear, digital scanned copies that are readable. Stand back and look at that if it's a readable transcript. Again, please redact any personal information, even if it's the last 4 digits of your social or your student ID number or any other item that would identify you other than your name. If you can go ahead and redact that information, that will be helpful, but we will review that as well and make sure that's redacted so that your personal identity information is safe. And then lastly, the last element is that out-of-state letter for any applicants who are at a university that does not have a Sea Grant program, but you may apply through an eligible Sea Grant program with that written statement. And once you get that letter from the Sea Grant Fellowship Program Manager, that would be your last document that you would have of the 6 elements in your application file. So we've gone over in detail the 6 elements of your application. We've given you some guidelines from the review criteria and from the student tables from the student guide. But we're going to go into more detail on each of these sections, specifically related to the review criteria. So these are the 6 elements for your application. And once you have submitted your application to the Texas Sea Grant program, there are 2 stages. So the next steps after your submission is the review process. So as applications come into us in February, then in March, the stage 1 review is a review at the state Sea Grant program level. And we have, per the federal funding guidelines, we're allowed to submit up to 6 of the most competitive applications to the National Sea Grant Office. We're also able to submit up to another 6 for those applicants who are not at a university that has, in a state that has a Sea Grant program. So there is a wonderful opportunity, and we've had students from other states apply. So it's a wonderful opportunity to if one knows of or if one is an applicant outside of Texas. So then during the March timeframe when we are having a review of all of the applications. Once that is done and the proposals are submitted by April 1 to NOAA, then at the national level, the stage 2 of the review process comes into play, where the National Selection Panel will review all the applications from the 34 Sea Grant programs and will select the top applicants. So it's very competitive. You're looking at 200 applications from across the state Sea Grant program. This year, they are going to select not less than 35, with approximately 17 assigned to the legislative branch. So who are on the review panels? At the state Sea Grant program level, the reviewers may consist of the Texas Sea Grant Director, may consist of former Knauss Fellow, and may consist of a former Texas Sea Grant funded researcher. We are required to have 3 reviewers reviewing all of the applications. And then at the national level, the panel consists of state Sea Grant directors and associate directors, National Sea Grant Advisory Board members, and also former and current Knauss Fellows. So the next section, as I mentioned, is now we will look at each element, each component within your application, and in more detail, the review criteria for each of those areas. So per the federal funding guidelines, and as outlined beautifully in the student guide that I keep referring back to with those tables, the review criteria used by both the state and national level per the guidelines, pages 14 through 17, looking at your overall relevant experience, and that is from different areas of your application. So your relevant experience that you can bring to a John A. Knauss Fellowship program is experience related to that you have displayed on your CV, experience related to what you have displayed on your personal education and career development response, and experience related to your relevant coursework and future plans. And you can see there that out of your entire application, 75% is going to be related to relevant experience level that you would be bringing forward in displaying on your CV, personal education, career development response, relevant coursework, and future year plans. So you can see the weight of the scoring here. Over half of the 75% that's weighted for the reviewing of your relevant experience, 55% will be on that personal education and career development response. And what we would like for you to do is, as you put together your CV, you want all of these areas of experiences to paint a picture on these 3 different documents of that experience level, because that's 75% of your score. 15% of your score will be based on your recommendations, letters and or endorsements. So 5% is weighted for your letters of recommendation from your faculty and other letter writer, and then 10% weight from the director's letter. And then looking at not only your relevant experience that you've described and displayed on these elements that you have in your application, and then in your letters, the reviewers will look at the overall application cohesion of all of these materials. So they're going to review these sections and score based on these percent distributions, but then they're going to step back and look at your overall application and how all of these have a good cohesion related to all aspects of those application materials, and that's a 10% weighted score. So again, note, and as I keep saying and emphasizing, refer back to the student guide section tables, because I've given you those content tips they've given you a review criteria scoring points, so you can see how much of that score is going to be specific to that area. So read, compare, as you're writing, and preparing your documents, have those tables right next to you, and step back, have a friend or a colleague or a faculty mentor review your documents, and get assistance from those who can step back and not only look at what you've written, but look at it objectively and see how it all flows together. So what we'd like to cover is how the panelists, the review panelists, will be looking for, what they will be looking for as they are weighting in giving you scoring points of that percent effort that's graded on the review criteria for each of these sections. So as I mentioned previously, that the relevance experience, that whole concept of your experience and how it's relevant to the Knauss Fellowship program, that's 3/4 of your score. And it has, they're wanting to look at the diversity of your background and experience, your education, extracurricular activities, interpersonal written and oral communication skills, and other applicable competencies. So for the Knauss Fellowship program, this includes the different elements here, the CV, your career education, career development response, and relevant coursework and future year plans will all be reviewed and scored looking at the diversity of your experience at 75% of your score. So it's very important to state your different interests and aspirations with what and how you want to move forward with your career and with this fellowship. And so whether you're submitting an application for a fellowship, whether you're submitting a proposal to be funded on a grant, I always guide applicants to spoon feed the reader. And this is what the review criteria is asking for. They want to see these items related to all of the documents that you're preparing. So tell them, tell the reader, tell the reviewers what you want them to know. And sometimes it's when you're in the details of it all, sometimes it's hard to step back and look at it from that perspective. But that's a kind of a best practice success tip. So on the CV related to relevant experience, what are the selection panels looking for? Well, it has this, does the student have employment, volunteer, extracurricular activities? And they would like to see if it, how is it, where are those activities related, whether it's related to employment, volunteer, academic, applied, research, administration, outreach, policy. You don't have to have policy. This is a policy educational fellowship, but these are the sorts of things that they'll be looking for. Your education and experience, if it's at an appropriate level to your career stage. Does the student demonstrate experience that's relevant and applicable to serving the American people, the diversity and equity inclusion aspect? The student's experience, does it show prior leadership roles? We talked about things where you may have overcome challenges and how you took a leadership role and learned from different experiences. And that can be any of your experiences related to student government, faculty, community that you might be involved with, advisory committees, community initiatives, etc. So again, how your experiences are all relevant on your CV. The panelists are looking for that relevant experience that I have here bolded that would be weighted at 10%. So for example, that review criteria that we've outlined here that the reviewers will be looking for. So if you've outlined all of what the reviewers are expecting to see per these review criteria guidelines for your CV, then you may get of that 10%, you may get a 7 to 10 score where it exceeds the expectations of the criteria that's listed up here. If your CV only adequately addresses, well, you'd get a mid-range score. If your CV is unclear in how it adequately addresses those expectations, that's how that score will fall out. So we want you to be sure to look at each of these elements. Here your CV is weighted at 10% or 10 points. So I can give you a little bit more of some ideas for your CV. Well, one is don't exceed 2 pages, because the reviewers at the national level will literally delete those pages. So 2-page maximum. Choose your syntax and your structure carefully. List your diversity of activities, the classes, your extracurricular awards, volunteer activities. Again, relate that experience to what you have on your CV can be of interest and be a successful component as you are applying to be a fellow, John A. Knauss Fellow. So list your different interests and aspirations that will help you move forward with your career. Tell them what's important to you and how you're going to move your career forward by being selected for the Knauss Fellowship, and also what you hope to, hopefully with what a reader would see on your CV, they might see where your in your background, your relevancy on your CV can make you a positive contributor to the fellowship program. Other ideas are to list your publications that are in review and press or published. Oral poster presentations you can list. Papers for classes are not considered. Seek assistance from your faculty advisor. Have them share an example CV and request review of your CV, as well as a personal education career development response draft that you've drafted. So, seek assistance from colleagues and your faculty advisor and mentor. So continuing on with the relevant experience related to the personal education and career development response, again, that's 55% of the 75% related to relevant experience. So we've gone over the CV, and now the personal education and career development response is weighted at 55%. Again, there are 3 sections. That first section is the icebreaker. It's only rated 5%, but grab their attention, demonstrate creative thinking and a willingness to think outside the box. With the adjectives, the sentence that would describe you and the adjectives that would describe your character. And again, the point scale. So at 5%, if you've exceeded the expectations of this criteria listed above, then you'll be scored at a higher level, and then on down from there. But we want to focus on you scoring at that high level. So always go back to, once you've written a section, look back at that review criteria that's on that student guide table and see if you've answered that question of that review criteria, so that you'll know that you'll be scoring higher on each of these sections. So section 1's the icebreaker. Section 2 are the objectives. Section 3 are the experiences related to your career path. So on section 2, your career path objectives is weighted at 25% of the 55%. So here, again, I've stressed for you to look at that point scale in the student guide, but at 25%, what the review panelists are looking for based on the review criteria are all of these areas so that are outlined here. So your career path and objectives We want you to be as specific and direct and concise while discussing what you could bring to the fellowship and what you hope to gain from the Knauss Fellowship. So it's a give or take. They really want to see, you know, sell yourself and let them know this is what you're wanting to bring to the fellowship. And because of what you're wanting to gain from this specific fellowship as a Knauss Fellow versus other fellowships, they would like for you to describe your career path and objectives, be specific, direct, and concise. Clearly articulate your career or professional goal. They'd like to see that your career path and objectives demonstrate your students' diverse personal and professional background. They'd like for you to demonstrate your creative thinking, analytical skills, and/or your capacity and willingness to make connections between science and the broader economic, social, and political issues. They'd like to see that the student demonstrates the ability to convey scientific knowledge in a broader, non-scientific context. And they would like your career path and objectives to align, when possible, with the broader mission of the Sea Grant program and NOAA. And then section 3 on your career path experience also rated it up to 25% of that 55. They'd like to see your experience level to display that you've shown interest in working with diverse collaborators, community members, and/or interested partners. They'd like to see that you have demonstrated an interest in or commitment to the Sea Grant values of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility. They would like to see your experience as demonstrating a commitment to apply expertise to serve science and serve society, and demonstrating a creativity and willingness to navigate a challenging situation and be a leader in those challenging areas that you have mastered. And they'd like to see that the student demonstrates leadership and problem-solving initiative related to those challenging situations. So again, look at that table with the point scale in the student guide under these sections. So some ideas for your personal education and career development response. Some of it's taken out specifically from the review criteria terminology, being concise in your descriptions. So clear, concise statements of your career or life goal. Address how your past experiences relate to the Knauss Fellowship, how this opportunity would enhance your career and what you bring to this fellowship. Again, that give and take. Provide evidence of the critical thinking, analytical skill, and/or capacity and willingness to make connections between science and the broader economic, social, and political issues of today. Demonstrate your ability to communicate and convey scientific knowledge in broader, non-scientific contexts. Again, not the hard jargon, not the acronyms. Spell items out and make it easy for the reviewer to quickly grasp what you are writing and describing. Stating a placement preference of legislative or the executive branch is no longer required in your applications and in your content. So keep these options open. The state director in their letter may indicate a preference, but do not state necessarily a particular office. So when we went over the stages of the review process, once the national process is finalized and finalists are selected, the state Sea Grant programs are notified in June which applicants are deemed finalists. They're not deemed fellows. At the initial period, they're deemed a finalist. And over the summertime, the Fellowship Program Office has webinars that are wonderful in giving the finalists a great idea of what it would be like to be a fellow in the legislative branch, or what it would like to be a fellow in the executive branch. So there'll be wonderful opportunities to learn more about this. You can even on the NOAA Knauss website look at the host offices that are currently hosting fellows for this year, 2022. But you don't need to worry about indicating any of that information in your application. So I just wanted to give you that FYI. And then lastly, do not tell us what you've already told us in your CV. Expand on your background and how your personal education and your career development, how all of that experience level is relevant to the fellowship, the Knauss Fellowship. So the bottom line, the reviewers are wanting you to provide an idea of why you're wanting to be a Knauss Fellow, what you hope to gain from the fellowship, what you can bring to the fellowship, and how the Knauss Fellowship specifically will incorporate into your career development. So that's, we've spent a lot of time on this section, but it's weighted 75% of your score. And so that's an important thing to consider. And again, I'm going to show this table. I mean, these tables are sections within the personnel career and development response. It's just providing, this is what you need to do, 1,500 words, the score, and then each of the sections, the icebreaker, the section 2, career path and objectives, section 3, the career path experience. So that's why we've spent so much time there. Coursework and future year plans. So speaking of relevant coursework and future year plans, that's weighted at a review criteria weights it at 10% of your application. 10%, 10 points. They'd like for you to hear, as I've said earlier, use the white space. Don't just list your classes. You know, this is an opportunity to describe your activities, describe your plans, sell yourself. So your class list, this is the class, this is a topic, this is how I feel it's going to be important to my career development, to the fellowship. So the student, the review criteria, the reviewers are specifically looking for whether you have employment, volunteer, or extracurricular activities in your current current coursework and in your future plans, and whether the education experience, either personal or professional, in your area of expertise is appropriate to your career stage, whether the student demonstrates work-life experiences that are relevant and applicable to serving the American people, and your experience level, whether there's a leadership role that you've taken on that's relevant to your career stage. So again, use the white space, describe your activities and plans, sell yourself, and limit it to a 1-page. And then on the letters of recommendations for the student, that's weighted at 15%. And the Knauss Fellowship Program, the endorsements and content of these letters that come from the State Sea Grant Program Director and the faculty advisor or the faculty member who knows of your experience and has worked with you, and the other letter of reference, they all want to have at a weighted score of 15%, the reviewers will be looking at the review criteria, as I'll be going over in the next slide. So of the overall 15%, 5% is coming from the letters of recommendation from your faculty member or other letter writer. The director's letter is at a 10% scale. So going back to your letters of recommendation, the criteria, the letter writers, you want them to demonstrate their knowledge of you and your abilities, not just that they had you in a class, but demonstrating that knowledge base of the student, of what you have and in your abilities where you've worked with that referee. The letter, the reviewers are looking for the letter to the writers to speak to your potential leadership, your confidence, maturity, and self-direction of the student. They would like the letter writers to provide evidence of the student's willingness and flexibility to tackle issues, challenges beyond your area of expertise, and an openness and capacity to expand your experiences. The review criteria is wanting the letter writers to provide evidence of the student's ability to convey scientific knowledge in a broader non-scientific context. So you can see some of the repetition going through all of these different elements. But again, it's all going to come together on different parts of your application. And so some of this seems repetitive, but each of the review criteria that's outlined in the federal funding guidelines, this is what the reviewers are looking for. And again, if the review criteria is successful as to what the letter writers have provided to you in their letters of recommendation, if the letters exceed these expectations of the review criteria, then you'll be at that higher score of a 5-point or 5% weight. And that's what we want you to shoot for. In your director's letter, which is weighted at 10%, the review panelists' review criteria is looking for the director letter to demonstrate how the student fits with the Knauss program, including any discussion of why the student belongs in the Knauss program. They would like the director's letter to highlight the skills, whether academic, professional, or personal, that the student would bring to the Knauss program, and for the director's letter to elaborate on information that's maybe not necessarily specifically addressed by the student in their application package. So during that state review time period, the mid-March timeframe or so, our director of Texas Sea Grant, Dr. Pamela Plotkin, will reach out to the applicant to schedule a phone or a virtual interview, which will be the basis for writing that strong director's letter of support that will be included in your application for submission to the national level. So that will occur. You'll be contacted in March at that point, towards the end of February, if not, certainly by the first part of March. So we've gone over all of the elements, the 5 to 6 elements of your application. And I had mentioned then the reviewers are going to step back and look at all of the application elements and how they all relate, how the overall application cohesion as a final review can be weighted at 10%. So the reviewers are going to be looking at all aspects of the application materials, your CV, personal education, career development response, your letters of recommendation, the director's letter, and they want to see that cohesion of all the relevancy and how your application is going to be a good competitive application. The review criteria for that overall application cohesion final review, that review criteria, they want the application materials to complement each other. They want the student to bring a diverse perspective to the program. The reviewers want to see if the student brings a diverse perspective to the program by looking at all of your elements of your application. They want the materials of the application to provide a clear picture of what the student would gain from receiving the fellowship. They would like the materials to provide a clear picture of what the student would bring to the Knauss Fellowship. So the overall final review of the cohesion of the entire package, the reviewers are going to be looking again at that give or take, what the student could gain from this fellowship as compared to other fellowships, and a clear picture of what you would want to, based on your relevant background and desires for your career goals, how you will bring that to the Knauss Fellowship program as a Knauss Fellow. So these review criteria of the overall cohesion of your application can score as high as 7 to 10%, 7 to 10 points, your overall application cohesion exceeds these expectations of the criteria listed above. And that's what we'd like for you to shoot for. And again, this is listed in those tables in the student guide. So of the other elements of your application that is not specifically subjected to a review criterion are your transcripts and that out-of-state letter if you happen to be an applicant in another state. So additional advice, 2 main points in preparing your application and then in stepping back and reviewing your materials for your application. So in preparing, we've been encouraging all of our interested applicants since October, November, December to start early. It takes time to collect all the pieces of your application, reread the application requirements and in your materials and see how the materials are cohesively a part of what is required in your application. Your letters of recommendation. Prep your letter writers early about the opportunity. Give them time to provide meaningful comment about you. And stay true to yourself. This is your application. Let your character and goals be the focus. I love this statement. This was written by Hunter Hawley, our program assistant, and he's got a great positive outlook on assisting with this application process. And this is Hunter in his way of life and how he does his work. And he's just asking, as you're preparing your application materials and you're into all the details of these application elements, again, stay true to yourself. This is your application. Let your character and goals be the focus. And then in reviewing your application materials, formatting, there are no specific requirements in the federal funding opportunity guidelines other than whether there's a page limit or on the letters of recommendation, they want that single spaced 2-page limit on each letter. There are no other formatting requirements. So we just recommend, it's pretty consistent across all standards of proposals or application submissions, is to use an 11 to 12 point font. Be consistent on your font type on all of your documents. So if you're the reviewer looking at a package, it's going to be so much easier and clearer to read and understand when everything is pretty consistent in that proposal or application package. So just be consistent on your font type on all the documents, and then use the 1-inch standard margins. As I've mentioned before, on acronyms, define them all. So proofread, you really need to go back and step back and do your own self spell check because it may be, Word may have a correct spelling, but when you're stepping back and proofreading and looking at the grammar and looking at the spell check, make sure you've got those simple things that can be very important when a reviewer is reviewing your application document. So proofread and look at that from an objective eye. And that's where a friend or a colleague or a student or your faculty advisor can review your application materials and give that other objective eye. And so lastly, our most important advice is, again, to read the federal funding opportunity there and to read and reread the student guide section tables and those evaluation criteria that I've been showing here on the screen. Ask us questions, reach out to us. Texas Sea Grant is here to answer any questions you may have along the way. And I have our contacts here for both myself and Hunter. And we are at the end of our presentation. So if there are any questions, you can either type your questions into the chat box. That might be the best way to go about that, because then we have a recorded text of your question rather than just asking a question out loud, and I still have everyone on mute. And if you can't think of anything right now, that's fine, but we'll give this a few minutes for you to type any questions you might have. And if not, please send your questions to me and copy Hunter, or send a question to Hunter and copy me. And we can make sure we're both on the same page. And if we don't know the answer, we'll find it out and get back to you. So it's about 10 after 12, but we'll wait a few minutes here.
Me, if you don't mind, I'd like to say something.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hunter. I wanted to say I've been on the other side of not this application necessarily, but of many different type of research opportunities in my life personally. And I know that when you're filling out perhaps information about yourself, you may think it may be redundant or perhaps not important, but you have to keep in mind that these people may not know who you are, and every single detail really does matter. So don't cut yourself short there. Make sure you write down things in your CV that are different, that contrast, to build this overall diverse application. That's really, I think, what they're looking for. So that's just my 2 cents to keep in mind.
Thank you, Hunter. Yes, so let's see. So one of our participants asked on the application whether or not the applicant submits the letters of recommendation with the other materials. One thing, there are some referees who may want that confidentiality, and that's perfectly fine. I think we have on our webpage, let me go to our webpage, where if a referee does desire that confidentiality, that they may send the letter to, let's see, I'm going to go over here so you can see what I'm doing. So here's our web page. And under funding, under student funding, under the John A. Knauss Policy Fellowship, I think we had on here where the letter writers, if they desire confidentiality, they may submit the letter to Hunter. An email submission. We will provide a submission receipt. Well, I thought we had this. So if the referee does desire confidentiality, they may submit that letter separately to Hunter. But what will be helpful to us, because once the application is submitted, we're not supposed to change anything with the application other than redacting personal information. What would be helpful is if you know your referee will be submitting directly to Hunter rather than it being provided to you for you to compile in your application, then insert a blank page that has the referee's name, letter recommendation in that same order in your application PDF. And then that way we'll just switch out those pages for you. Let's see, these other questions are now coming in. So another question, I noticed some sections have multiple questions and one word limit as a whole. When responding, should we write a paragraph that addresses the questions, or should we answer each question following the format one, answer, format number one, answer, number two, answer, et cetera, and just be sure to keep under the word limit of both? That might be a great idea. And this is the first time that the program has given these specific guidelines, and they're really wanting you to answer each of those questions. So, be creative and that either listing the question in your response or just starting that new paragraph indentation can work. Hunter, did you have a thought?
Yes, I'd say, again, this is a whole new way that they're rearranging it, the criterion this year. I would give it to them just as they ask for you, as they line it out for you. So if there's that one word, then you put the one word there and then go next so that there's no confusion. They know you adhered to the rules and they can't dock you for that, for being precise. So I understand that. I would too be like, should I make one paragraph? And they decipher what I mean from it. But no, I think in this step, you want to give it to them just as they ask for it. And it may seem kind of contradictory to an application. You may be thinking maybe an essay or a packet. But if they say, for example, on the one word or the two sentences and then the three sentences, I would do it just like that personally. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I know I've seen where I have reviewed principal researchers, principal investigators' proposals, and they outline specific parts that are required of a federal funded opportunities. Let's say, for example, from the National Science Foundation, each of those sections, a lot of the more clearly written proposals, like from an engineer, and they'll outline it, so that boom, 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 that reviewer is saying, oh, okay, it's this section. So Hunter, that's a great call. So you might do that. It's not required, but it might be easier. Let's see. Another question, I'm navigating changing my academic CV to this fellowship specific CV. I have ample teaching experience, however, it's not directly relevant, or is it? Do you have a suggestion on how to highlight this other than teaching experience? It's quite fine to have different CVs for different audiences, and so having those transferable skills. Yes, you may have this ample teaching experience, and from that, this is the transferable skill that can be used in the fellowship that shows my engaged diversity experience, my desire to work, and so you can address it from that point. Does that answer that question? I'm thinking, yes. Okay. Let's see, another question. I was wondering if you could expand on the timeline for hearing back about the application. So in mid-March, will you hear back even if you aren't selected for an interview? And if you are selected, what is the timeline for hearing back at the national level? So the proposals are submitted February 18th. We will conduct an administrative review, and then we will send the reviewers out, the applications out for review at the state level. That'll take a couple of weeks or so as we get those responses and review ratings back, and make our selections as to which ones that we would be going forward to present to the national level. Still in that early March, maybe mid-March timeframe is when the director would reach out to you to have that interview in order for the director to write the director's letter. And so once we then package the application in an application that's submitted by our sponsored programs office by or before April 1, we will reach back out to you after that submission date. So probably the first part of April, we can reach out to you and let you know that we have submitted your application to the national level. We can do that for you. And then we all will not hear back from the national level on their selections of finalists until June. Early to mid-June is usually that time period. So another question, when we are applying, should we gear the application to be one of the positions as far as executive or legislative, or try to keep the application broad to be considered for both? So yes, you should consider the application broad. And it's not a requirement to say one or the other. Once your background, as you have a discussion with the director of Texas Sea Grant in their interview with you for their writing of the letter, the director may bring up those questions, but it's not a requirement. You certainly can't have all of that knowledge base, and that is why it's been a couple of years now where the Fellowship Program Office, once they've decided which applicants are selected as finalists, that they have a working session webinar in July that explains more of the executive and legislative positions, and they figure out which finalists would be in which cohort. But you don't have to specifically gear your application to one or the other, just gear it with your background on being a successful application for the fellowship. And then you have, based on Jess's questions, since subheadings also count towards the word count, do we include those? Well, that's something to consider. So that's going to be your creative ability on how to do that. But thank you for raising that again, as I had. To me, if I'm reviewing your application, it would be clear and concise as to what you're writing about. So that you would need to, I would advise, as Jess was saying on the numbering, and Hunter had given his guidance as well. I think definitely having the subheadings is something important to make it easier for the reviewer to look for when they're reading your application and based on the review criteria.
I have a couple of thoughts to those questions that may be helpful. As for the former one about positions, whether you say executive or legislative, I'm not sure if you've been able to attend some of the Knauss office hours with the current fellows. They touched on this a little bit, stating that, try to keep yourself as a well-rounded. If it comes down to two people in the end, and one is, I only am going to do executive, this doesn't really portray as someone who's flexible and can deal with like incoming stress, for example. So keeping that open, and perhaps Mia said, letting the director speak to your skills that someone else later can then attribute to you and assign you to that role. But I would leave yourself open for that.
Yeah, leave yourself open, and the director does not even have to state.
And as for the other question about should you put the header or not, again, up to you. It can be more challenging, but it also can be very uplifting on your application. I'm including the headers and I'm under the word count. I know myself, I know how to speak, I know how to write, and I know how to convey myself concisely. Those are all attractive features of an applicant.
Thank you, Hunter. And a follow-up, then does everyone who applies get to interview the director? Yes. And do you have advice for how to prepare for this interview? When the director reaches out to make an appointment with you in early to mid-March, you'll want to basically, you already have your application done, and she may have a specific question that I'm thinking of one.
I have a thought.
That we had for each. We have another fellowship competition going on, and that, I don't know, that might be what you were going to ask for, but we have another fellowship competition where the director is also meeting with those applicants, and the director was wanting the applicant to draft, be ready to provide let's see. What were you going to say?
In the meantime, I wanted to say anything on your application is fair game for the director to ask you about. So if you would like to put it on your CV, be expected to be able to speak of it to length if that is what's chosen to be spoken about. So not that anyone would be adding anything frivolous, but if you do, you can and have the ability to be asked upon it. So that's a part of the interview. You never know what's coming, and neither do we. So I would suggest if it's important enough to write down, then it's important enough to be rehearsed and to know those experiences well, so you can convey them to the director when she asks.
Yes, because out of all of the letters at 15%, 10% of that is the director's letter. So you want to be prepared, as Hunter said, with all of the pieces of your application, rehearsed in your mind, and you're meeting with the director as an interview to be an applicant to the John A. Knauss Fellowship program, and just like you would be interviewing for a job. I mean, that's what you're doing here. So just be prepared personally on how you feel you would be to sell yourself in a professional manner. I think we're at the end of our questions. So we will just wait a couple minutes, and other than that, just be sure to email us with any other questions. So Jordana, did we answer your question?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I was kind of more so wondering, like, how do you know if you've made it or at what stage? Because I thought you could only submit 6 people for the national level.
Yeah, so we will know of, depending on how the state review goes, and it also depends on how many applications we receive. We want to put forth all 6. If we only receive 5, we want to put forth all 5. But we want to make sure that we're sending forward a good application. So it may not be till after the director's letter is written and after we're submitting the applications to the national office. So really it's going to be that first week of April when we're going to be able to give you a final determination on that.
Okay, got you. So everybody will interview with the director, but just because you interview doesn't mean you're guaranteed that letter and that push forward.
Right. Okay. I mean, we want to keep pushing you forward, even through the director letter stage and until our sponsored programs office submits to the national level.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. That does answer my question.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we have all the questions at this point? See, there's a Q&A. Oh, I didn't know, when we were applying, should we get it? Okay, so we already responded to that. Okay, great. That was in the Q&A and in the chat.
Sorry, I submitted another one.
Yeah, I just noticed that. If you ever get to find out how, yes, thank you for bringing that up. So when the national office provides notification in June of which applicants have been selected as finalists for each of the state Sea Grant programs, they will provide the reviewers' documents that'll be redacted, you know, so that you won't know who the reviewers were reviewer 1, 2, 3, 4, or whomever. But yes, we will receive those when we find out from the national office who the finalists are. They will provide us the reviewer score sheets and comments. And when we notify you all in June, we will provide you those reviewer documents. Okay. I think we're ready to end the webinar at this point, and thank you for your participation and best wishes, and let us know if we can help in any other way. Everybody have a great rest of your week. Thank you, Hunter.